Into the Heart of Advent, chapter 22, Room at the Inn. Our Bible passage is read from the King James Version of the Bible. It's Luke 2, verses 1 to 7. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judaea, into the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. He went to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them at the inn. So, just a minute, I say to Jesus, my hand poised on the remote control for the TV. Have I got this straight? Mary and Joseph went to that tower with the difficult name for you to be born. Migdalida, says Jesus, the tower of the flock. Yes, they did. We've just sat down with a cup of tea, lit the fire and switched on the Christmas lights. This involves crawling about on the floor, squeezed in the gap beside the armchair, to hold down the button so the lights pulse and twinkle calmly, rather than flashing on and off like an epileptic strobe. And we're about to watch a repeat we've already seen repeated before of Pointless. So they didn't stay in the stable that belonged to the inn when the innkeeper said there were no rooms left. Jesus looks at me. How much do you want to see Pointless? Because none of what you just said happened. What? So what did happen then? No, I'm not bothered about Pointless. I've already seen this episode twice. I know the right answers, and I can even remember what the wrong answers were. We can watch House of Games later instead. Tell me about Mary and Joseph and the inn. That's the point, says Jesus. There wasn't an inn. He takes a sip of his tea, but it's still boiling hot and he almost spills it, so he puts it back down on the table. You've got the picture of the kind of man Joseph was, the sort of person who would always do the right thing. He was honourable and protective and a man of deep faith. Well, that's how the rest of his family were too. When the census took place, Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem because that's where Joseph's family came from. You know that, it has it in the Bible. But could you imagine any credible scenario where Joseph would arrive late for a census, or put off travelling when Mary was so near her time? The story is always told that when they got to Bethlehem, all the rooms were fully booked. Joseph, I tell you, was the world's most cautious, prudent and highly organised man. Twice he took me out of the way of murderous kings when I was a baby. Joseph was not a spontaneous individual. He planned. He thought things through. He had connections. Not only that, but could you envisage any situation in which a man like Joseph might turn up in the village he came from where plenty of his relatives still lived, with his wife in the early stages of labour, and none of those relatives would take them in. That couldn't happen, could it? If you think about it. Oh, I say, no, I suppose not. Where did the story come from then? It's one of those things that got lost in translation, says Jesus, because they wrote down the Gospels in Greek and then it went into Latin, and then everyone had the King James Bible, which was where the misapprehension crept in. Right there in Luke's Gospel, the King James Bible says Mary laid her baby in a manger because there was no room for them at the inn. The word that's being translated there is kataluma, but it doesn't mean inn. A kataluma is a guest bedroom. An inn, a place like a hotel, was called a pandokeion. It wasn't so much like a travel lodge, and certainly not like the Hilton, just a dormitory to sleep in and a refectory to get an evening meal. But that's where people passing through would have stayed. So when Joseph took Mary to his relatives' home, they were welcomed. Of course they were. They went in and had a nice meal and enjoyed catching up on family news. But then it became clear that a few twinges earlier in the day were developing into the real thing. Baby on the way. There isn't room in most people's kataluma for everything you need to have a baby. Mainly other women to help you, and somewhere to put the baby, and things for washing you, and a lampstand. The kataluma had enough space for Mary and Joseph to tuck in together for a few nights, and a space to snuggle a baby in between them. But you need more room than that to actually give birth. And that was when one of the women spoke up and suggested the Tower of the Flock, because it was all set up for giving birth, and only just down the road, and not used at that time of year. Set up for giving birth? I gape at him. Yeah, but sheep? Jesus shakes his head. These weren't just any sheep, remember. These were the lambs without blemish. The shepherds took better care of those ewes than most people did their own wives. She was right, it was the perfect place. So Mary, poor thing, had to trudge half a mile down the road while she was in labour. That helps sometimes, said Jesus. Giving birth isn't an illness. He tried another cautious sip of his tea, and it's cool enough to drink. I turn on the telly. I'm going to remember all of that, I tell him. You never know, it might be on Pointless one day. A kataluma is a guest bedroom, and the word for what we call an inn now is a pantechnicon. Almost, says Jesus. Pandokeion.